The Men's Health and Wellbeing Forum is a safe space to connect, share experiences and explore practical ways to support well-being in an environment built on trust, respect and understanding. Here, open conversations matter. By breaking stigma and encouraging honest dialogue, we create room for real support and meaningful change. Together we grow, learning from one another, strengthening our foundations, and building resilience that extends beyond the workplace. This is a community where every voice counts, where support is shared, and where we are standing together, stronger, more connected, and ready to move forward with confidence.
Today is Time to Talk Day, so it's so although we did have it in the calendar, it's actually worked out really well that it's landed on a really important day when we're thinking about people having those very important conversations with each other and how they can add value, how they can add support, how they can open up, whatever it may be to help them. Today's topic is around building resilience and breaking stereotypes. So it's just an open conversation. Facilitating as such is a loose word. It's about just how this conversation goes. We're just inviting anyone to have their say about sharing experiences, thinking about maybe exploring men's stereotypes or how that works around men's mental health. But also in the sort of journey around those conversations, if that gives us some really good thoughts or ideas or shared experiences about things that have worked for us or things we can do, that might be a really helpful thing. The broader context is that we are filming and Stephen is kindly going to edit this down and we're sharing with the organisation. So the idea is that we edit down to a short leader engaged piece, which then links you to the Men's Health and Wellbeing page where there's a broader piece and a broader piece beyond that. The idea is all about sharing and encouraging people to come forward. There's been some positive reactions already to the membership growing through with the Time to Talk series, so we're hopefully we'll do that. The idea is to share. We're not here to fix anything. Not fix anyone. It's about just having a conversation.
I definitely got to a point where I felt that the kind of general view of a man was you just got to be able to get on with it. Like, man up was the sort of thing that I railed against a bit because there's various points in my life where I felt, stress, anxiety, anger, and I think the general view was always I always played football all my life, and that kind of dressing room culture, just get on with it, what's the matter there? So I think men's mental health specifically is to try and break that down, because it's ultimately the store. My experience, you ultimately store when things happen to you, and Steve talked about kind of trauma, and it's in you, and if you push it down, ultimately that's gonna. My experience, I think that will cause you longer term harm. So I think men's mental health for me has always been that stigma. I think the really important thing in the workplace, which I don't think applies just to men, is also that reflection, again, at various points in my career, about I used to feel as though it was that whatever was going on in your personal life, you had to be able to just walk through that door and put it all to one side and get on with your job. And I actually think I can do that. I am quite good at that. Compartmentalisation, and actually I probably in my life have used work as a sort of work is almost a safe space. I can get on with it, I know what I'm doing. So I think the really important thing, and the best managers I've had and some of the experience is where there's that recognition that whatever is going on, you can't do that. You're a single person, you're a single human being, and therefore if you're dealing with things outside of work, they are going to impact. They might not visibly impact your work, but they're gonna be there, and as individuals, you should feel comfortable bringing that into the workspace. And I've been lucky enough to I've worked in environments where I haven't felt comfortable doing that, but I've worked in environments where I felt like I've got a manager. I'm going to say, look, I'm having a really tough time with something at the moment. I just need I need a day off, or I need a bit of space. But equally, as an employer, as an organisation, you've got to create that culture where people feel comfortable. And I think it's just really big.
I think I might have heard others speak about actually coming into work has been really helpful. Thinking about the pandemic and the loneliness around that, but having that opportunity to talk. So working or being at home, is that influencing things? What anything else to add around that?
I would say, I wonder if we're coming at this from a bit of a safe angle in this conversation at the moment, because I think the thing we must remember is that everybody's baseline home is very different, and that's an important thing to remember, is that actually not everybody's baseline is necessarily our baseline, right? So we hopefully go home to our house, have a comfortable bed, have all of those kind of things which you'd expect, and actually we're not having blazing arguments with a tenant or whoever who's living in close proximity to us. But that baseline is not necessarily the same for everybody who's in our workforce, and also not necessarily the same for everybody who we work with externally to that. So I think there's a little bit about, so we can man up and take that kind of separation of home life to work to some extent, but then there's going to be times when actually it comes to, staff absenteeism and things will certainly be an issue in all workforces, but actually there's always going to be times when people who live with trauma or abuse at home and all of those kind of things. So domestic violence might be an example. I'm trying to think of a good one that frames what I'm trying to talk about. But yeah, so maybe domestic violence is a reasonable angle to come in from. So that baseline is very different to waking up that morning and then regulating and coming into work for a 9 o'clock start and performance. And probably to your point about performance conversation, there's probably some stuff that employers can do and the council can really do much better about understanding the baseline of where somebody might be coming from when it comes to that separation of home life and then stepping into work and re-regulating and being ready to perform in terms of job.
And conversely, I would say that on the working from home point, I have better conversations with some colleagues when we're both working from home, because we're not in the open office where they can actually say how they're feeling. And I'll have a regular check-in with, there's 1 or 2 colleagues that every week we have at least a 10-minute check-in. And it's when we're both working from home, because they can actually open up and be like, oh yeah, because at our office down there, you're next to all of your managers, you're next to all of your colleagues. That you can't, if you've got an issue that's more just under rumbling, and once you've got it off your chest, you'll be feeling fine. You can't necessarily, even the things like layouts of the offices and how that affects you. If you're feeling a bit stressed, you come in, it's a big open space, it's busy. It's not always the easiest place to sit and have a quiet work with somebody.
And it's maybe interesting if you get asked, maybe not at home how you are really, but if you're asked at work how you are, how honest you are with your answer might be. Des, you were going to come.
No, I was going to say, it's an interesting point. There's that piece around being able to have those, what I would describe as intimate conversations with colleagues. And unfortunately, I don't know which sort of point of frame I'd look at it, but I've had a scenario in a few years that I've been here where colleagues have had bereavement, and these two, they've both been their parents as well, their mother, men's alike with their mothers for the most part, and it was really interesting where others, you try and navigate that whole piece around bereavement and loss for someone, because you see them and to a certain extent you may or may not have been informed, depending on how the team is knit. So-and-so's recently lost their mother, blah, blah, blah. But you can then see, because of that intimacy and comfort, and it goes back to your point about also the environment is really important, of as also another male, but it could be anyone, being comfortable as well as confident enough to be able to go up and actually have a conversation with that individual. Months later, both of those individuals at different times have still come and sought me out and said thank you.
Right.
Because it was, I don't think people are necessarily avoiding, but it's such a delicate subject matter and so tricky. And then, going back to this thing about, particularly with some males, and it comes about how they present as well. And one of them particularly is a large framed individual, so sort of person you often just go up to and have those types of conversations. But it was really interesting what they took away from it and how it resonated with them, months and months later.
Anything else, John, just around the holding the emotions in personal experiences, and just share what if you're happy to share. This isn't
Yeah. I guess maybe to that question, but I'll just quickly talk about what you've all said here, because I think in terms of thinking work, and I love the points of the baseline where we're all coming from, all different. The one thing I found, and this I got from my wife, is generally when we all come into work, how you sleep, how things, and we live that way. But she tends to go, how are you reading? Because it's an open question, and let me say 90% of the time they ask anyone, how are you? I'm fine. But there's a lot happening. But I think it comes with, one, for me, I say my intuition. You may say fine, but I'm probably hearing and seeing a lot more, and it's finding that opening to really ask, how are you really? And sometimes that's what gets, and I'll say men in the main, because since we're talking about men, we then get someone to really open up. There are bits of, we need to build that friendship, but I find you don't always have to be friends like that to ask that genuine question. I'm not just asking because it's a no. It's, I really care about what's happening with you. Hence I'm asking, how are you? The way my wife says is, how are you there and there? Which may be difficult for us to break down, but sometimes someone just goes, yeah, it's not really great.
I think just off the back of that, if I may, I think one of the things for me, and I fortunately, so I came now as an NHS England, so a lot of my learning came from there, as well as in other spaces. But what I've always taken away from that is humanising scenarios and each other. Because like you're saying, Steve, work is work and performance, and I've got managers, we've got managers, and everyone, where's this, where's that, where we at with this, where's that. But actually, being able to have those intimate conversations, or whatever you want to call them, actually humanises people at work. They're no longer the CEO, they're no longer the enforcement officer, they're no longer that. They're an individual, and you've taken up a bit of time to have that. Even just that, how things, how, as you talked about, one of my colleagues chatting away the other day, and it was like, oh, well, I'm going to go up to when they do the leave request. It's fine. Yeah, I want to go to my daughter because she's in uni, and went, yeah, it's all right. Yeah, great. And then I started turning the conversation, going, I haven't been to these for ages, I've got some really good clubs. And, but it was just humanising all that kind of stuff and bringing down that pressure valve. So it's not always about work, and it's not always the role, but it's actually, there's a human being that comes in to, as you say, walk through that door.
We have the messages down there, we've kind of ordered this together at all levels, and hoping doors for people absolutely, and having the confidence to have those conversations. I mean, I'm just interested in saying we need hours more time, don't we? We are wrapping through time. I'm interested in just kind of how your Majesty, how you or how you spot those signs, or maybe you're just sort of thinking about that within ourselves, but also I suppose to maybe think about as a sort of sharing experience for ourselves. It's how do you deal with any kind of stress or anxieties or emotions involved in, and then probably as a final thought, if you were kind of looking back at your younger self, what would you say to yourself now around mental health? And so it's quite a lot. Can we just try and bring someone?
Yeah, I'd address that one a bit. So I'd say the thing I'd say to my younger self is about advocating for your own needs. So I think this speaks to a little bit about the point about when you can't. So Steve, you said your friend who collapsed on the football field, and you couldn't take that meeting the next day. I think as a younger colleague, I probably may not have wanted to put that onto somebody else for fear of it looking like actually that's not resilience. Whereas actually, I think this brings me around to a really important point about how you manage your own resilience. I think, and you said about advocating for your own needs. I think even down to taking a few days off when it's might be a bereavement that isn't necessarily described as a close family bereavement, but actually you need to advocate for your own support. But in terms of my own resilience, I'm one of these people who has to do lots of techniques around being very grounded and very regulated before I come into the office, and that's part of my lived experiences as to why my nervous system is very different to the very average male nervous system. And so this is where hopefully it speaks for some colleagues who don't necessarily have voices within these rooms, because actually they may not want to come to some of these things. And so actually if you're a survivor of trauma, whatever that trauma might be, your nervous system baseline is very different to somebody who actually has had a very different upbringing to you. So stress and anxiety, sometimes people might be taking medication for their stress and anxiety, colleagues who you may not recognise as being in that position. So men who you think actually they're in these positions of leadership, who may actually be struggling with their own mental health. For me, I am a very good person for listening to music as grounding technique. So I have very specific playlists that I listen to.
You did a LinkedIn?
I did, yeah. So this is why I'm a big advocate for nervous system regulation in the workforce, but also in the systemic change which we do around work our young people.
Being aware of the symptoms of men having mental ill health, so frustration, short-temperedness.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, going back, that wasn't seen as, unless you were down in the dumps, that you weren't seen as depressed. But I think more education on that's important, because even as a manager, understanding if somebody's snappy, like I said, what's going on at home.
There's a brilliant Bill Burr sketch where he kind of does it simply. He goes, men just either fine or really, really angry, and they just switch between the two. They go, oh, you're fine. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. You mean you're fine? They just keep pushing it. They're like, ah! It's just, the way you just summed it up is like, that's it.
Yeah, I think it's just very much, it's just not spoken about. It's, mental health, even the fact it's called men's mental health, rather than just mental health. It says that it's seen as a woman thing or a feminine thing, rather than just being something that everybody suffers from,
Last point from anyone who wants to grab it.
I think it's just important that you don't, when you're younger, you have your hobbies and things that kind of, keep you balanced. But I think as you move older, those things get kind of put to one side. More pressures come on, you're kind of seen as the provider, and then you can kind of lose yourself. And then all of a sudden it kind of hits you one day, thinking, oh, I'm really not coping really well with this. Because all the things that you used to regulate your mood, you let them go to do other things. So it's just kind of, keeping what made you and what interests you, keeping some of those things going, your hobbies, I guess, sports or whatever, things like that.
Thank you, everyone. We'd love to have a bit more time, but I think that's started the conversation, and we've literally touched on the subject, but we can come back together and do some more. So I appreciate everybody's time.